Well, the rain is back. Back to our usual weather. A few degrees above freezing, rainy, dark. Welcome to the fall. Finn doesn't seem to mind it though. Rain, snow, sun, wind, hail, whatever. He'll play outside. Well, what do you think, Finn? Shall we whip out some handrails? So while going through the stock to sort and cut our balusters for the guardrails, I picked out 3 of the straightest, cleanest 2x2s. And they're going to just become some handrails that will be affordable, functional, nothing fancy, but they'll get the job done. So first we're going to clean them up a little bit, cut them to length. We'll route the edges over and we'll finish them up. All right, our first one is going to be our 39-degree staircase. Set that to 39. We want to look for any defects. Anything that could be a problem to run your hand against will go on the inside. You want the top, outside, and the bottom to be your best pieces. Everything I see here is pretty minimal. That's maybe the roughest, so we'll make that inside. That'll make this surface the top. Okay, you're gonna have to watch out for this now. Come on, let's watch out. Just making sure there's no staples in here. And there we have some. Lots of staples in here. Geez, it's a good thing I checked. We'll give 220 a try. I might have to actually leave these in the shop for a couple days so they can dry out some. Sanding wood that is thoroughly quite wet tends to fuzz instead of sand, and it just sort of becomes self-defeating. Yeah, this is working out pretty good. I think what we'll do is we'll get most of the sanding here done right now, and I think I'll just let them dry out for a little bit. I'll give them a couple days here in the heated shop, and then I'll come back and see if there's any areas where the grain is still being raised, and I'll sand those down. Let's talk a little bit about the dynamics that are at play right now. These things are wet, like not just rained on, but these things are wet through and through, as most treated lumber that we get is. When wood is wet, what happens is the fibers, the wood fibers, tend to raise. This is true of most woods, and I'd even hazard a guess that probably all the domestic woods in the US and Canada will behave in a grain raising fashion when they get wet. Now you can use this to your advantage when you're sanding something out, especially if you're going to be applying a water-based dye or stain to it. But what we end up with is when sanding it, when it's this wet and it hasn't had a chance to dry back out, is that the wood fibers are quite supple and the fibers tend to just lay over instead of getting sheared off by the cutter or by the sandpaper. And that's why with the trim router you notice that there's long strings of stuff, of wood shavings instead of little chips coming out. And you know, the same holds true when sanding, just on a much smaller level. Now there is a trade-off. When I have to sand this stuff, I like sanding it when it's wet, because the dust for the most part drops. It'll end up either in the sander or it'll drop. Very little gets into the air when it's wet. Once it's dry, it's a bit of a different story, and I don't really want to be breathing this stuff in. You know, I tend not to like wearing a respirator if I don't have to. So it's a bit of a trade-off, and it's one that I'm willing to make. But it does mean that I'm going to have to let these dry out for a couple more days, and then come back and just hit them very quickly with a final sand. I'll probably just use a half sheet of 220 and give them a quick hand sand. It won't take me more than a minute a piece. Well, it's not exactly sunny, not warm either, but the rain has stopped for a bit, so hey, I'll take that. We're just here going to do a little bit of finishing up and then get the cleanup underway. Just gonna do a double check, make sure we didn't miss anything while we're at it, and we'll get our handrails put up. But first I have to trim back something. Let me show you something, see if you can see this. Do you see it? How about now? Look at the taper this thing's on. We have 2.5 inches of overhang on this side, and we go down to about 1/4 to 1/2 inch down there. So we'll get to make sure we trim that up first, and otherwise we're going to be getting in the way of our handrail. We're not going to have clearance. You know, even though we've got a standoff, there's not that much clearance, so we don't want that to happen. So we'll get that cleaned up. So here, code requirement is that our handrail, not to be confused with the guardrail, is at a height between 865 and 965 millimeters. Now, in real numbers, that's roughly 34 to 38 inches. It's been my experience that a handrail that is placed lower generally works better for most people. As such, I tend to place mine right at 34 inches. Now, just like with our guardrails, that measurement is taken off of the tangent line to the nosing of the stairs. We talked in more depth about that in a previous video, so go back and watch the earlier ones if you want to see more about how that's determined. I'm going to be using standard brackets, powder coated for exterior use. Unfortunately, one thing that often gets overlooked is the hardware used to mount these. On exterior rails, where we have to have ACQ compatibility, the hardware is usually, with these, painted, left bright, or maybe has a light zinc coating, but it's not hot dip galvanized or stainless. So I always switch out the hardware for some stainless steel screws. Costs a little bit more. On a project like this, it's an extra $15 or so, so it's affordable. But most importantly, it's safe over the long run, because the handrail is something that, if it failed, really could see somebody getting injured. I don't want to take any chances with it, and it's just one of those areas that going the extra mile really is worth it. I'm just going to double check. Height height of this is 33. That's great. Our handrails are 1.5 inches in thickness or in height, so that'll put our handrails at 34.5 inches, well within code. When setting handrails, not only is it important to ensure that our distance from the tangent line off the nosing of our treads up to the top of our handrail meets minimum code, but we also want to double check that we do not have too far of a span between brackets, that we don't have a situation where our hands are going to get pinched between the guarding or wall and handrail. And lastly, we want our handrail to be centered nicely so it aesthetically looks like a professional has done it and not something that's just been thrown together. To help with lining up the handrail, I start off by anchoring one of the middle brackets along the length of the handrail. If there's only 2 brackets, I start off with the top one. I put only 1 screw in the bottom to begin with. That allows a lot of play to get the rest of the brackets set. So the rest of the brackets will get set with 1 screw each, and then I'll come in and clamp them down with a 2nd screw. So there we go, we've got 1 handrail in place. It's stout, it's smooth. We let it dry off for a couple days in our shop, give it a final sanding. It's also made of pressure treated wood, so it's going to last longer than if we were to put a typical hardwood rail out here. Because the handrail brackets are going to be mounted on the post, the midfield bracket needs to be brought out so that it's flush with the post. So I've made a couple of these little blocks. Okay, everything looks true, so now we can tighten it up. Final detail we got to do is put some wood preservative on our 2 handrails that are not underneath the eave. The first one's up against the side of the house. There's a large eave on this house. It'll be amply protected. But on these 2 outside here, because we took a fair bit of wood off when we were rounding our corners over, I want to just make sure that we give it a little bit extra protection. For these types of applications where someone is quite possibly going to rub up against the handrail, I don't use the typical green stuff. I'm always worried that that's going to rub off on someone's jacket or pants. So instead I have this clear treating solution. The benefit of it, of course, is that it's clear and it won't stain green. So you may be wondering, why don't I just use this stuff all the time? Well, quite simply because it is difficult to tell if you've missed treating the end cut of a board when it's clear. And that's the only reason. When I use the stuff that has the green tint in it, it's real easy to tell right off the bat, hey, that part, that cut there, it hasn't been treated yet. Better take care of that. Well, that'd be about it. This project's pretty well wrapped up. Got a little cleanup to do. Thanks very much for hanging out with Finn and I on this. And Finn, you want to say goodbye to the people? He's deeply engrossed in his chew toy. But I appreciate it. Feel free to leave comments. If you got any questions, I'll try to get back to them. I always read comments, and it's great connecting with others out there that are interested in this type of thing too. Hey, you want to say goodbye to the people? Let's see this. Give. Thank you. Speak. Say goodbye to the people. Oh. Well, thanks guys for joining us on this one. It's great that we were able to get it done before it got too cold or wet. And until next time, take care. Look forward to reading any comments, and we'll see you later.